Hi guys, today we're with Tom Munds, and I've asked him in to give us a little bit of an idea what it means to be in Idaho, what it's, the political climate, the social climate and things like that. And I think Tom is uniquely qualified to speak on these things, and let's ask him why. Hey, good morning, Tom. Thanks for being here.
Morning, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us just a little bit about yourself.
So I'm 57. I've been in Idaho for about 30 years now. I came from, I grew up in Honolulu, and all that implies, surfing and doing all those fun things. I ended up moving, and then I got a job in California. I lived in San Bernardino for probably for a while. I can't remember exactly, but it was quite a while. I moved out here in '91, I think. I wasn't really paying much attention to politics. I wasn't taught as most people aren't, taught about what kind of form of government we have, why it's important, why history was important. History to me it just wasn't important. What a bunch of white-haired dudes did, a couple hundred years ago, I just didn't understand the relevance of it. And I attended a church conference when I was asked to at a small church that my family went to in Meridian, primarily older people that weren't very active, and I wanted to be active in my church anyway. But to appease the family, I went, and I had listened to a guy, I don't know if I could mention his name, but he's very, very active out in Columbus, Ohio. As an activist, he was sued by the ACLU praying with his team on the football field in New London, Ohio. And he was going to come and speak about politics and the pulpit. And I thought, well, geez, I thought that was illegal, and I want to see some sparks fly. So I decided to go and find out. I was intrigued by what he was going to talk about. And so he was here for 4 days, and I just was only planning to attend the first day just so I could, appease my family and that kind of a thing. Right. And I stayed all 4 days, and there was a tremendous transformation that took place in me. And I don't know how many people are religious out there or whatever, men that are trying to correct themselves and become better people and going to church and going to men's retreats and thinking when you're going to come back you're going to change the world. Only 3 days later you're up to the same shenanigans that you were doing some time ago. And the reason why I mention that is because when I was bit by this political bug after this guy came to speak, I felt the same way I did when I came home from a church retreat, and the feeling never left. Okay. And so it's a continual buzz in my body from the time that I wake up to the time that I go to bed. And when I had woken up to realize and at this time I had never read a book. So I was 45, and I had never read a book. I swore, and when I was surfing with some friends in the 10th grade, I swore that once I graduated, I would never read a book because life was going to be great for me, right? So the guy that I was talking to, the pastor, I said, well, why don't you, I said, what do I do? I said, I understand what you're saying, kind of. I mean, I get the emotion, And he said, go home and pray about it. And I said, well, God doesn't talk to me and whatever. And it goes kind of down the religious, spiritual side of all of that. And then I had a friend give me a book. And it was really weird. The books that I received for the first 2 years were almost as if they were given to me by planned succession. I mean, one after the other. And I began with The Law by Frederick Bastiat, and at that point I was really angry, and I was angry at all my, political. Anybody that was related to government, I was angry. Okay. I mean, but I did it out of complete ignorance because I didn't know better, right? And so, over time, I started to read more. I really wanted to become active. I started my own YouTube channel. I got involved in Facebook at that time. I decided to run for office in 2008. I went to a gay pride parade in 2009 because at that time I had began my studies with Christian apologetics. Okay. Right? I wanted to be able to defend the faith, and I wanted to be able to ask pastors why they weren't reaching out to, if there was anything that I needed to be held accountable for before I actually went down there and started doing what I wanted to do. And, of course, Google's all lit up with about how hateful I am and all that kind of thing. and so I got involved in the religious side of that, and then I got involved in the constitutional side, and I had studied some philosophy and some of that stuff, and I spent most of my time in the constitutional realm. Then I started looking at the federal constitution. Then once I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of that, I got into the state constitution, and then I started. I got on the radio. I've been on the radio for about 6 years now. On Boise radio, I'm just a regular call-in until such time as somebody decides that I have something to say long enough to be able to keep me. But my voice, I guess the things that I say are, I've been told they're seen as reasonable and consistent, and the talk show host says that it's been raising the ratings because I have a little bit of a not necessarily aggression, but you can definitely tell there's a passionate drive behind what I'm saying. Yeah. And I swore that I was so embarrassed about how ignorant I was. My primary motivation now, and I think will be for the next foreseen future, is trying to be able to help people that don't have time to read, allow me to try to teach them about what I've learned. Okay. And the really cool thing about that is this journey is not something that took me on my own. It was meeting guys like you. It was meeting guys like, other people that are active. It's reaching out to all different kinds of people to be able to understand what they think and why they think that way. And at that time, I had developed a relatively firm foundation as it relates to the principles of America and those kinds of things. And I got opportunities to speak at the State House, and I've introduced the governor for the state of Idaho, Butch Otter, the Supreme Court Justice Eisman. Like I said, I'd been on the radio, and I had sworn at that point in time, because I believed that God had given me this divine appointment to do what I do, because who's going to want to get involved in the muck and the mire of politics and to be able to have it embedded in your heart so deep that it's really nothing that you can get away from. Yeah. And so I'm active today. I ended up getting a job for one of the longest standing education and action organizations in the country that to a lot of people has been the topic of great smear campaigns and things like that, where people are claiming that we are something that we've never been, and all it would have taken to correct that would be for the average people to get beyond their emotions and look at the facts and realize the truth of the matter.
Well, it sounds like you'd be in good company, because there's a lot of good organizations out there, good movements, good ideas that get maligned.
There are.
I mean, anything from fulfilling the Second Amendment to freedom of speech. Mm-hmm.
Well, and anybody that's paying any attention, we love to call ourselves Americans, but nobody can define American. I run into people all over the place that say that they're conservatives, or they're moving here because they're conservative, and I would love to be able to visit with anybody that believes that that's true, and to be able to explain to them why that really isn't true, or why it may not be true. And it isn't to be able to argue with you, or to be able to tell you not to move here, or that you should get out of town, or whatever. It's just to be able to help us get to know each other and start taking control of our English language, and not let the media and not let the government be able to continually agitate people to keep us divided, which is really the crux of the issue. It's not that the Democrats and the Republicans are so far divided we don't believe in anything the same. If you actually sit down and you talk to people that are different, even people that aren't conservative, there are some fundamental likenesses that we all have. And we've become so divided that we now are operating completely on emotion, without any ability to be able to control ourselves, kind of like animals. And we become more, we tend to enjoy agitating each other, as social media is a perfect example of that. Twitter is absolutely a horrible place to be, because it's just, there's nothing good on it. You know what I mean? You've got the congressmen that seem like they're spending more time on Twitter than they are actually reading the bills, and we know they're not reading them. And we have that problem in Idaho too. So we need to redefine our English language, or take back our language, and maybe consider going back to Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary to be able to understand the words and the intent of the founders when they ended up creating our Constitution. People say that, that's the great thing about America, is that we all can have a differing opinion. One of the dangerous things is I get that with law enforcement all the time. Mm-hmm. Well, they haven't really thought this through well enough, and I have full respect for a lot of them, so this isn't an attack on them. It's just part of our misinformation that we've been fed is, if law enforcement adheres to a particular rule of law, then we're not allowed any deviation from that. What it does is it puts them in the power of telling us what the law is when we are masters and they're supposed to be the servants. So the master-servant relationship is already 180 degrees out of whack. Right? So the one thing, and Constitution Day was a couple of days ago, and the one thing that I had mentioned on the radio was, let's come together today, and today out of any other day, let's try to be consistent in what we're saying. Okay? Let's really think about, because to me, inconsistency is the mother of all distrust. Mm-hmm. And we all know that from the political realm, because we vote people in because they say one thing, and what happens? They say something completely different, right. Or they've actually changed the meaning of the word, like what the meaning of the word is. You know what I mean? And so once we can start communicating with each other again, knowing what words actually mean, maybe discussing what conservatism really is. I mean, what makes you a conservative? What makes you an American? Because I guarantee you most people that are saying that they are actually adhering more to Marxist concepts than they are to Americanist concepts. Okay. So, other than that, if we can, when we begin, and that's where people will start coming together, with the desire to be able to get to know each other and to be able to understand some of the issues that we have. Common misconception with healthcare, right? You have the Democrats that say, the Republicans just don't really, we don't care, we just want to kill people. Right. While they're killing babies. But anyway, and so we have an inconsistency there, right? So the understanding is that people like us don't want health care. Well, personally, and I have no problem sharing anything personal about my life, I don't have insurance. I have a family of 4, what am I going to do? But nobody's talking about the Medicare gap that is still a gap for me. You know what I mean? In this particular case in Idaho, it starts at $18,000 and it goes up to X amount of dollars, but I'm still in the gap. So what I find is that when we're looking at these bills, we buy into what the media is saying, and we don't do any research on our own. Nobody even reads the bills, right? If Congress isn't going to, why should we? And so we end up arguing completely on emotion, which is on every political topic, whether it's local or federal or city or state or anything else. So anyway, you get me going, and I won't ever stop. So
well, let me ask you a couple of questions. So we have a room full of Californians that are thinking about coming up here. You lived in California for a while. Yeah. Do you see a difference? I mean, obviously politically, I guess we're more conservative, whatever that means, but maybe Californians are looking more to just escape this oppression. I mean, whether you are, maybe you think you're liberal, maybe you really are conservative, maybe you just want to be left alone and live your life and raise your kids and stuff like that. Is that something that can be done more readily up here in Idaho than maybe California?
Idaho is, I believe Idaho to be the last bastion of freedom in the country.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Aside from maybe Wyoming or Montana, but see, I say those things without being in Montana or Wyoming, mm-hmm. Right? There was a book that somebody had written called From Saddles to Sushi about Wyoming, and so it talked about how Wyoming's demographic has changed, and I just found out, for the conservatives that are moving here, and without any disrespect to people with alternative lifestyles or whatever, we all know that Utah, for example, was considered a very conservative state, and now they have a gay mayor. Yeah. And how did that happen? Well, there was a variety of machinations that actually made that happen, and so I'll relate that to a couple of local elections that we had, where I had talked to some of the mayors because they were friends of mine, and they lost. And the common thread between those is that the people didn't feel like they needed to be active because they figured, well, Utah's conservative, we have nothing to worry about. There's no way a gay mayor's going to get in, right? And it happened.
So they were the sleeping giant out there.
Yes, it is. So I encourage people. So there are Facebook pages. California's moving to Idaho, and I guess there's a bunch of them. And I've been meeting people on there, and I had lunch in Idaho Falls with a couple, a very, very nice couple. But they believe that they are conservative, but they are defining their own terms, and this is where the problem comes in. And the one thing that I would encourage anybody, like I did on Facebook and do anywhere, if you want to come here, according to the scriptures, God really says that we should be able to honor our strangers like our neighbors and our friends, right? So when we understand that, regardless of any hesitation or frustration I have because my property taxes are going through the roof and we're going to end up losing our property because people are coming here to seek asylum from other countries, I ask people to think about when you're going to come here. Because inaction on behalf of the citizens in their own community means it's your fault. Mm-hmm. When you allow things to happen in your own community and you're not active, it's your fault. So you have to admit to yourself, they say part of the healing process is identifying that you have a problem. And the reason why I say that without any equivocation is if you're going to come here to this state and you're going to be coming here to flee oppression, you absolutely need to become engaged. You need to commit to become engaged consistently because this is possibly the last bastion of freedom in the country. And if America was seen as the shining light, the beacon of hope for all nations, and now all of our states have become corrupt, and all of the nations are becoming corrupt, then you are coming to the last place that you can come to seek freedom. And if we are going to be able to accept you the way that you hope to be accepted, then you need to become part of becoming an Idahoan, an American, is to be able to not necessarily become active out of ignorance, and just think just because you just spout your mouth somehow, you're going to be able to save your nation. You have to become educated.
And engaged. So like the organization I was telling you that I'm with, we are an education and action organization because we believe that there's no point in acting if you're uneducated, right? So you have to understand the issues. You have to be willing to communicate. You have to be willing to be able to bite your tongue sometimes, to be able to learn to understand, initiate or engage in biblical brotherly love, right? I mean, if we're going to be living together in the last bastion of freedom, then let's treat this like a group of people that have came from, in wagons and horseback and all of those things, and we're settling in a community where there's nobody. So do you think in the past the reason that Idaho's stayed more conservative is traditionally people have been more engaged? But now that we're getting this big influx of people in that may not be engaged, that might actually put us at risk for turning into another California. Well,
I think the common conception is that Idaho is conservative. Again, it goes back to redefining the English language, and that's if I understand what you're saying correctly. So we had some Democrat governors, right? And they're clearly probably seen more as Republicans today with our current political climate. But it goes back to the assumption that we are something that we clearly aren't. The question is, to me, with my kind of worldview, were we more conservative back then? I think the answer is yes, for sure. But we were never conservative to the degree that I think people have viewed us. Okay. When you have, and there's another very dangerous element in Idaho politics, and it's what we call the Idaho establishment. Establishment has become a lot more well-used term around the country, and most of the people that are engaged in politics understand that the establishment is the establishment that tries to maintain control, not necessarily try to better the country or restore liberty, right? So in Idaho, we have, I have been made aware of a PAC. It's called Otter PAC. And what the money typically does, I don't know how the money's funneled in there or whatever, but I caution people about this because in the Federalist Papers, when they talk about factions to me are any means to be able to divide people for a particular end, right? And so you have dangerous factions, right? You got the Fabians, you got you've got the socialists, you got the Trotskyites, and you got this and that and the other. You have the Republican establishment, and the Republican establishment's end game is to be able to maintain Republican control. That's it. No adherence to the party platform. As a matter of fact, you get chastised when you try to communicate with the establishment about trying to adhere to the party platform. And I explained to these senators and everything, if you are for borders, you are for adhering to not only our Constitution, but the party platform, because it's a form of border, right? We all have borders. Our families have borders. Our cars have borders. We have a private personal space that's a border, right? So anybody that says that we need to abolish borders doesn't have any idea what they're talking about, and they're so inconsistent in their worldview, most of them don't even realize it, right? You have a border on your home. Well, let's take the walls off your home and we'll just use a roof, right? And so when you begin to start seeing things differently and understand what it is other people are saying, it becomes easier to be able to dialogue about why some of the things they believe are dangerous. The conservative couple, for example, am I going off on a tangent here? Off in a different direction? So one of the things that they were talking about is, we're a Christian couple, but we have a problem with, we don't believe in same-sex marriage, but who are we to be able to, decide what other people are going to do in the name of freedom?
Yeah, I've heard that before. It's like, who am I to judge? God will judge. Well,
and they're clearly not well enough educated on the dangers of moral relativism. Mm-hmm. So when we're all allowed to be able to, and people understand that is my truth and your truth, right, not realizing that biblically speaking, there's only one truth, right? You can be entitled to your own opinions. Nobody's saying that you don't have the freedom to be able to make choices, but you're going to be suffering the consequences. You'll either be enjoying the consequences of the decisions you're making, or you're going to suffer the consequences. And realize and try to think before you act on the unintended consequences that are going to be coming back to bite you.
So there's absolutes, or I heard one person say, there's no absolutes. Mm-hmm. And you say, are you absolutely sure?
Yes. And that's the perfect, and really that probably brings it together in the most simple way, is that, our Constitution was written not in a relative way according to who you are or according to the time that you live in. Washington talked about the fact that whenever there's an issue or a complication in the understanding of the Constitution, go back to the time that it was written. Go back to what they said. Go back to the words of Noah Webster's dictionary. Go back to try to understand exactly what was going on. And so that's why you have all this stuff with the civil rights and the 14th Amendment and and all that, and people are seeking reparations and all this because we're a slave state. They know nothing about the history of slavery. And some people believe it actually started in America. So the absolute ignorance of people is absolutely crazy. And they focus on bullying and all that. Bullying is a direct, although we're not advocating for bullying, right? In the land of brotherly love, we're supposed to treat each other with respect. But while we're sitting there claiming that we shouldn't be bullying, the very people that are claiming that we shouldn't be bullying are the ones that are bullying.
That's right.
So that's another inconsistency, right? And so when they say that, they don't realize that when you try to be able to impose regulations on bullying, what you're really doing is violating the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. And you're not even thinking about the fact that the average person hates something. And the average person hates a multitude of things. Mm-hmm. The question is, do you hate that thing enough to be able to commit a crime in doing it by harming somebody else or violating their liberty, right?
And of course, with relativism, the crime, it may not be applicable because you say, that doesn't apply to me, and I'm going to go, take this brick and bash somebody's head in.
Yeah.
And then they get away with it, and then the next guy says, well, apparently the law doesn't apply all the time. It's just relative. And
mm-hmm. Well, now you have the laws that are becoming way more lenient. You've got, I think California somebody was telling me yesterday that they're lessening the crimes, or not even making the possession of heroin a crime. Mm-hmm. They're actually, the government is actually using taxpayer dollars to be able to give people fresh hypodermic needles so that they're not causing more of a problem.
Or there's sanctuary cities.
Yeah, or the trash is piling up all over the place because cities can't, the cities can't or don't want to use the tax dollars for the very thing they're created for, and they're more focused on giving focused on giving illegals rights, at the expense of the rights of the American. Well, if you understood the Constitution, you'd understand that the Constitution was written by and for we the people, not them, the immigrants, right? And so there's so much that people need to know. And so when I talk to people from California, and hopefully I can spend more time talking to them to try to be able to not only help them assimilate, which is incredibly important, right, for anybody that comes into a nation or comes into another state, is when in Rome, what's that old saying? When you're in Rome, do as the Romans.
Yeah, right.
Obviously within reason. I mean, we don't want you to be a neocon and operate with the Republican establishment and have your own primary concern maintaining Republican control. The other thing about Republican control in Idaho that's really important in my communication with senators and prosecutors and things is they believe that people with the constitutional liberty mindset are the enemy. Mm-hmm. They've actually came out and told me that. That's very, very dangerous, and it's also very inconsistent with Idaho conservatism, because conservatism in the state or in our country actually is a word I wouldn't even use in normal speech. You're either you're an American, and coming along with that is your fundamental not only knowledge of the Constitution, but applying that Constitution to maintain the few and defined powers that are not only given to the federal government, but to be able to hold the states accountable for their misappropriations or for their bad behavior.
So these things take education, knowledge, keeping up on current events, history.
Yes.
And of course, this is a lot of work for people.
It is.
That's where you come in, is you've got this heart to help educate people, talk with them, answer their questions, make videos, and things like that.
Well, the hard part is, and some people, I know that some of the Democrats have had some fun with it, but if somebody can learn something from one of my weaknesses, then I believe it makes I believe it makes both of us stronger.
Is it chocolate?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's dark chocolate. I love dark chocolate. But I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I read my first book 15 years ago.
That's amazing.
And I've read a lot since then. And the reason why I say that is because for somebody that feels like maybe they're like me, they grew up and they don't want to admit to anybody they've never read a book. I mean, who would actually admit that in public, right? That you can actually do it if you want to, and you can become educated on some of the things that you need to know. But the other thing, too, is to be able to find somebody that you trust and to be able to hang on them and to be able to communicate with them, whether it's meeting with them for coffee or attending meetings or whatever, what have you. But I think one of the strongest bases of consistency for me, when I began to be really active in 2007, I went to every meeting. I went to Democrat meetings, I went to Republican meetings, I went to Tea Party meetings, I went to sovereign citizen meetings, I went to, which is kind of a misnomer, but anyway, they were self-educated law stuff. So we were studying, the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Admiralty law and elements of conspiracy. And that's the other thing too, is there elements of conspiracy is something that needs to be understood. If you are going to be in Idaho and you want to be able to protect your state, or even if you're not coming here, realize there's a difference between conspiracy and conspiracy theory. And it's absolutely a vital component in the education process. Our organization, for example, focuses on history, because we know that those that don't know it are doomed to repeat its mistakes, right? We focus on current events. But we focus on current events from a position of history because we know that we're repeating our mistakes, right? Because we know our history. The other part of that is a strong constitutional continuing education on exactly, what's going on with the Electoral College, right now, and trying to the Article 5 convention and some of those things. But the part that nobody talks about, which is really something that I'm absolutely not ashamed about, is the element of conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, if somebody wants to call somebody a conspiracy theorist, you could do that. But it basically shows a little bit of your ignorance, because if you think about it in the most simple, basic level, everybody goes to the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Why do they go to the movies?
It's fun. It's escapism.
Mm-hmm. But what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for as you go through that movie? What are you actually waiting for, or what are you actually walked through?
Well, yeah, we're waiting to the end for the punchline.
But so what happens from the beginning to the end of the movie, and we're setting ourselves up for it every time we go into a movie. There's a conspiracy of some sort that's going on where somebody's going to emerge the hero and the victim, and somebody the bad guy and the good guy, right? And then it's kind of like the whodunit, right? I mean, that was the statement back in the 70s, at least for me. My mom used to say, "Well, I want to go to a movie and find out whodunit." Well, if you're going to a movie to find out whodunit, you're exposing the fact that a conspiracy exists. So why would you think that a conspiracy wouldn't exist in your own government when you watch Law and Order and you watch, anything else? Right. And so conspiracies really, and so when you go back and you understand that, the CIA ended up creating a document in '67, and it was exposed that you can get a copy of on the internet. They actually came up with the term conspiracy theory so that they could keep people from questioning the JFK assassination. Mm-hmm. Well, why would the government do that?
Indeed.
I mean, don't we? If we're free Americans, don't we have the ability to be able to do our own research without it being censored?
Yeah.
Well, so that's a form of censorship. So if you're going to be adhering to the idea that conspiracy theorists are wacky, crazy people, you have to understand that there's a difference between conspiracy theory, defined by the CIA, or the existence of conspiracy.
So do you think that's turned into a social construct to shut you up, to keep you from talking, to keep you from ultimately thinking about other things than what you've been fed just through, Facebook or TV or whatever?
Yes. Well, yeah, so when you go through and you look at some of the documents, and you're probably a lot more well educated than I am, but to sharing with you what I know is I'm very thankful for. I was visiting with the police chief and the sheriff last week in Twin Falls, and I had asked them, I said, "Have you ever heard of the Cloward and Piven strategy?" Mm-hmm. And they said, "No."
Really?
It's out there? That's really interesting. I mean, it's out there. Yeah. Well, so is everything out there. How do you know what to believe and how not? And so I asked them, I said, "Well, have you ever heard of Operation Vampire Killer?" And what about the fact that, right-wing extremism? Nobody's mentioning anything about left-wing extremism. It's all right-wing extremism. Why? Yeah. They label, they label certain classes of people, which is something that is a collective element, not an individualistic element. And our country was based on individualism, not collectivism. So now we're looking at conservatism in Idaho, for example, or anywhere else, and we're saying, okay, does this appeal to the collective, or does this appeal to the individual? Or to the collective as individuals, kind of like rights in general under God, right? And so, anyway, I forget where I was going, but that's kind of a lot of where I'm coming from with all that.
So do you think that in Idaho, because you're out there in the field, you see this every day, is it more okay to talk about and to question things than opposed to California, where and people are like secretive about it? They like have maybe secret winks that, hey, I'm questioning that, or I'm conservative, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. But they're scared to raise their hand. I mean, especially if they have a job in academia or in the government. Mm-hmm. I mean, as soon as you say that, hey, maybe Trump's right on this, I mean, they're fired. Yeah. But up here, maybe we're more open to that.
Well, Trump has been, I shouldn't say Trump has been the source of contention, but I use the term globalist or insiders, but, he's, when a whole world hates the man, and they get caught in the emotion of it, they can't necessarily see the man for who he is. And if you don't understand conspiracy, you don't understand your Constitution, you don't understand the limits of the president in Article 2, you're adhering to, some manufactured or not, depending on, whatever, about his, being with a girl or not being with a girl or whatever. You're focusing on trivial issues which then I would refer you to the Communist Rules for Revolution that was found in Dusseldorf in 1919 in Dusseldorf, Germany, found by the Allied forces. And it basically outlines what the communists plan to implement all of these things to do to be able to collapse America, And so that's how, well, collapse anywhere, and that's how they operate. So that's another critical document that people need to understand so that they can understand this is manufactured.
Right.
And then you have FDR that comes out and makes a statement back when he did, and he says, if anything happens, nothing in politics happens by accident.
Right.
Something like that.
And then there's the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto
Yes.
read into the congressional record in, I think, 57.
Yep. And then you have the MIAC report that came out that said that anybody believes in the New World Order or the One World Government, or anybody that wants to return to gold-backed currency, or anybody that's against a single issue like abortion. So now the government says, well, you can't be against killing babies. If you believe in going back to fiscal responsibility, you're a terrorist.
Right.
Well, how dare them do that? And where is that authority in the Constitution that allows them to be able to do that? So our dereliction of duty as civically involved citizens has allowed all of this stuff to happen. You've got a contingency of people that are really opposed to cops. Mm-hmm. To the point where they're just screaming at them and videotaping them and harassing them. Not that videotaping is there's a way to do it, but and they're seeing this emerging police state. Well, most of those people that are doing this stuff I have never seen before. Mm-hmm. And so they're relatively new in their activism, which I communicate with law enforcement, tell them it's a stage. And you should be able to see them grow out of that stage like I did. I was very aggressive when I started.
But it starts very young. For instance, today, there's all kids across the entire country that are being excused from school to, I guess, protest climate change.
Yeah, I did an hour video on the State House, a man on the street interview. I love doing those. And I wore my fedora and my I think I looked pretty sharp that day. But anyway, and they said I must be a Republican, so therefore I wasn't welcome. And so you had the kids chanting like the videos of Obama, like the Youth Brigade, reminiscent of the Youth Brigades. This is what democracy looks like. And I'm just mortified that our children are being, they're going to be the 21st century brown shirts.
Yeah.
So they're clearly doing now as they grow up, they're becoming radicalized. You have people like AOC in the office, and people might think that she's Latino and she's attractive, and so therefore, she's oppressed and she should be in there, but she makes no sense in anything she's talking about. She appeals to the issues of the heart, okay? I believe everybody should have free health care, but I'm not a socialist. Mm-hmm. So I say that although I believe in my heart that everybody should have free health care and a roof over their head, it's not realistic. And not only that, who's going to provide that? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the argument with population. Some people actually believe that the population is too crowded. I could look outside in Boise and see traffic 2 years is doubled in 2 years. If I were the one to be able to implement population control, am I supposed to be able to tell you, sorry, Californians, when you come here, you can't move here now because I'm now in control of the population and we have to limit population here? So it has super, super dangerous consequences of doing that, especially when you give the government the authority to do that, knowing in history that they have always tried to be able to sell the whole mantra about they want to be able to take care of you cradle to grave, and then it always ends up in genocide. Mm-hmm. Always. So the question is, where are we in that process, and how long is it going to take to get people to realize, look, if you're going to leave from California because you have that stuff going on, a lot of that is already here. The LGBT in the school, the teaching children masturbation, that two mommies is okay in kindergarten, and to be able to gender confuse our children is already here. We've got adulting classes in public libraries because parents don't even know how to, this sort of perpetual ignorance has now allowed the government to be able to teach parents how to be able to teach adulting classes.
Right.
So now we are a nanny state, and Idaho is no exception in that regard. I had a text message from somebody, and she was super frustrated. She said, "Tom, are we socialist?" And I said, I don't know if socialist to me is not a destination. It's a progression. It's something that's gradual. It's something that happens, because I think Stalin said it best, right? He said the purpose of socialism is communism. Well, whether communism is an end game or not, history would show that nobody has really truly become purely communist, because part of that ideology, in all of its irony, is to be able to completely abolish government because it won't be necessary, because everybody will have everything equal.
Right.
I mean, the lunacy behind that is unbelievable. So socialism is already here. It's not a thing. It's a mechanism. And when you look at the Medicare, that's a form of socialism. You have to understand what you're talking about. If you're going to ask me about socialism, understand what socialism is. If you understand that it's the government control of private businesses and the transportation and utilities companies and the rest of those things. I mean, we voted by a huge margin Medicare for all. Now the government, Idaho doesn't have the money for it, and they're currently working on a deal where they're forcing the counties to be able to pay money to be able to help fund Medicare, because the state's not going to do it. Well, to my knowledge, the state is the one that actually gives the money to the counties, or something like that. Some of that stuff is kind of confusing, at least for me, and I'm not a numbers guy anyway. So if you're going to ask me economic questions, I can just tell you them about fundamentally. Most of what I know is more along the lines of our Constitution, maybe some philosophical or just a basic grassroots activism side of the spectrum. So,
well, as we get towards the end of our interview here today, can you give our California viewers an idea of, is it different here? Do we still have a chance here? Is there a way that they can make a difference if they come here?
The answer to that is, and I'll have to say this again, we are one of the last places of freedom, I believe, left in the country. Now, I haven't been to other places in the country, but I do pay attention to current events, and I know what's going on in a lot of other states. I do travel the state of Idaho. I am privy to information that not too many people are privy to, because I get to talk with people one-on-one that are more open, and the fact that they share some of their heart about some of the things that are going on, because they don't have a newspaper or a media source. People being harassed by certain bureaucrats and things of that nature, and so the one thing that I'll tell anybody from California is that if you're going to come here, I would almost require, if I could, and this is only for those obviously that wish to be able to try to keep Idaho for what it is. You have to try to identify what you believe Idaho really is. If you're going to go so far as to say conservative, that's not enough, because you have to define what conservative is. Do you have an adherence to the Constitution? Do you want to adhere to the Constitution as a living, breathing document, as the liberals want to do it, or do you want to try to understand what our founding fathers were talking about? Are you willing to be able to learn about the unintended consequences of even giving the government an inch, much less a mile, allowing them to be able to do things beyond what they were supposed to be doing? It's going to take eternal vigilance. Jefferson, right? He said that it takes eternal vigilance, and he meant it. It means that you need to be engaged every day. I don't care how busy you are. You got 2 jobs. You're an American. You're going to enjoy our freedom. You're going to sit there and enjoy freedom of speech. You're going to enjoy your right to bear arms. You're going to enjoy all those things. Understand why you have those rights. There is more to it than just coming here and calling yourself a conservative, because you can just jump on the establishment train and be so compartmentalized in your thinking that you think as long as you have that this state is red, that's kind of an interesting historical color anyway, then you're not part of what is going to keep Idaho what it has been. And so there is a chance, but you need to be active. I had reached out to people on Facebook. I have a website. I mean, if you need to be directed somewhere and you have a hot button issue, whether it's environmentalism, whether it's abortion, whether it's, you want to study law, you want to be involved in something fighting the Article 5 convention, you want to do Constitution classes, you want to to do videos in your community. You want me to come speak. I mean, I'll go wherever. If you're capable of speaking and you want to speak, I will do my best to be able to put information in front of you, to be able to put you out there so that somehow you may be heard and you might be able to take the baton farther than I can. I'm as active as I can possibly be every day. And it's not about trying to bring attention to myself. It's about telling people about what's going on, because I'm worried about my country, I'm worried about my state, I'm worried about my neighbors, and I'm worried about our future. When we have families that I talk to, and I ask them, why they're not active and are they not aware that it's going to affect their future generations, and they say to me, let them figure it out, we had to. That's a pretty scary place in America. Because one of our founding principles is the fact that we have always laid down our lives and made those sacrifices for future generations. And when that stops, the perpetual freedom that we could be enjoying also stops.
Yeah. And it used to be that every next generation was better off somehow than the previous.
Yes.
But I don't know if that's continuing on or not.
No. Well, I mean, as far as funding, somebody had said that we rely on federal funding. 2/3 of our budget relies on federal funding. Well, whether that fraction is accurate or not is irrelevant. The fact is that the states are relying on the federal government for money. And the irony behind that is they want to point the finger at the government and said, you guys are spending way too much money and we need to rein in an out-of-control government. But yet on the other hand, the states are saying we're filling out more grants and more grants and more grants and more grants, not realizing that it's not only federalizing our nation to the point where the states are no longer sovereign, but that now we're engaging in what I call federal supremacy. Now, whatever the Supreme Court says, now that somehow they can make law, even though it's against Article 3, but the average person doesn't know.
Yeah.
So continual engagement is important, reaching out to as many people as you can. If you don't have time to read, then I would encourage you to be able to try to reach out to people that are active, and try to, if you're not really sure where you fit in the spectrum, go to a Democrat meeting, go to a Republican meeting, go to liberty meetings, constitutional meetings. I can tell you that there are things I might not know, and I'll tell you if I don't know them. But the one thing that I can tell you that I do know is the fact that I know a lot of people. Mm. And so if I'm nothing else, I can become a source of networking for people, directing them where they want to go, since I have the luxury of traveling the whole state.
Wow.
So
you're almost like a state resource for people that want to make a difference and get involved. And
yeah, I hope to be that, yes.
Just need to reach out and get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know one thing for positive. They don't have you in California.
No, because I'm here.
That's exactly right. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming by today.
Thanks for having me.
Much appreciated.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you guys next time.